Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Surgeon Syndicate. We are back today with the second half of our discussion with Nimesh Patel. For those of you who didn't listen to the first episode, I encourage you to go back. It had some great information, was an awesome episode. And we were discussing about how to keep doctors in medicine with a lot of the stresses they have. So let's dive back in as we're going to discuss some mentorship topics. So here we are returning to the conversation with Nimesh Patel. So with the work you're doing with residents, because you had mentioned some things about how giving some mentorship for developing the rest of their career. So is this, I mean, how much more is it besides when they're there and you're introducing them to the management side of private practice and seeing how that works? Are you adding in some of this, like, here's the way to look at your personal finances and getting to retirement while they're there?
Yeah. So to be honest, with a resident specific, I don't go into a lot of detail in terms of like specifics, like, hey, these you should have, when you have kids, you should have a 529, you should have max out your 401k, because at the same point, right? They're there to do their clinical rotation, but I definitely use an opportunity to kind of just expand their horizon and let them start thinking about it. To take it a step further, so what that has done is when they're done with residency and they're out in practice, this is where I feel like I get a lot of calls back from our former residents to say, hey, I remember you talking about this. And now that I've been working for a couple of years, I'm a young doc in practice, I'm trying to figure out how to get my practice going, like how to be efficient, how do I generate real income and do it clinically sound, like how to take care of patients well, review cases, get better. But then also now that I have some income, like what are the first steps I need to do with it? And that's kind of where it's almost like the primary is when they're residents, or their initial education on the space is when they're residents. And then some will reach back out who really get it and understand and say, okay, where do I go with it from here? So interesting, like I've advised people over the years of just giving them some direction of their initial steps, not in terms of major financial like decisions in terms of what to invest in, but at least these are the big categories you should be thinking of. And similar, like how I then organize my discussions with my colleagues about getting into real estate and develop Lion Park Capital into something more substantial. I've organized a program where like I do mentor young docs, one-on-one coaching, mentorship, like ongoing resident training of sorts, but for young physicians. And how do you bill and code properly? How do you balance the revenue side of your practice and the expense side? How do you handle PAs? And then that carries over to mindset and work-life balance and, navigating, building a practice and balancing a young family. So it's been kind of this ongoing education of, residency is just the early, as we all know, inklings of how do you become a good surgeon, while also learning how do you learn the basics of once you get out of practice. But then it doesn't stop when you're done with residency. I can't even imagine how much I've learned over the last 10, 15 years as a surgeon and in private practice. And I feel like I'm still learning it. And it's scary that how much I feel like I know, and I don't know everything, how much I know on the practice side as well as the expense side of running a business. And there's young guys and gals coming out of training who are going to be my equal who know nothing about it. And it's an unfair uphill battle for all of us coming out of training. But I just try to help with that essentially with the program that we have set up.
So is this within your practice where you're kind of mentoring them in all of life, or is this for anybody who's like, hey, when they reach out to you, they're mostly people, I guess, you met when they were residents, but
yeah. So, I mean, I think it helps because I met a lot of these guys as residents, so we have a personal relationship, but no, this is something I do on my own. It's basically a coaching mentorship program. So I help any individual provider who may be in this boat where they know they need to take some big steps in a certain direction. And I basically help share my experiences. I help share with them a framework that I've used, what my colleagues have used, other physicians who have been very successful. And basically we shave years off of, the learning curve of being a physician or surgeon into months, right? We just kind of cut to the chase, don't have to learn by trial by fire, and we just make that step easier for them. So that's kind of what I do. That's something I've developed. Again, I've been doing it naturally, working with residents and helping colleagues, and now I've just formally kind of solidified into an organized program.
That's pretty awesome, because I look back at like my first years, and it's like this wandering around. You're back and forth. You're like, oh, I go and try this, and I try this, and I'm like, no, yes, no, and you're slowly coming forward, and even some of the people who were mentors, and it's like, so what do you do with your money? And so now you're with a financial advisor in this string of mutual funds, or buying whole life policies from the bank, and and they're like, now what do I do with this? And
it's interesting, right? Because like at the end of the day, when you're a young physician, your mentors are the people you work with, or the people that you might see in the hospital. So that's all you can rely on, unless you have a good network outside of that. And then you're listening to people that may or may not have the right guidance themselves, or maybe have made mistakes, or you fill in the blank, right? So they may even have their own ulterior motives, like, hey, you should do your surgical procedure and run your practice exactly how I do it. There's no proof that theirs is the best way. So you really need a collection of best practices with almost from an unbiased approach. And I feel like I've done a good job of sharing that. Like I share with, hey, this is what I've done and what I've learned, and this has worked for me, but here's 5 other partners I work with who have a fantastic career, and this is what they've done. And then you see what works best for each individual person. So I feel like I agree. I wish I just had, we had mentorship programs in my practice. That's one of the benefits of being a large private group. But at the same time, unless someone is completely dialed in and in your corner and ready to help every aspect of things, you may or may not be getting the full mentorship benefit or not. And it's not to anyone's fault. It's just, each personality has, some are better coaches than others, some are better mentors than others, some teach surgery better than, there's so many categories of being a physician. Having it organized in one location, which is what I've helped do for young physicians, is I think been a big benefit. And we continue to grow. I mean, we dial things in for each individual person. Everyone has different goals and areas they want to focus on, whether it's clinical or family or outside of work. And it's been really nice to kind of see young physicians flourish in that environment.
That's it. Thinking about it from a big group perspective, if a big group incorporated that kind of more into what they do when they bring in young docs, like, we're going to give you some resources to build your whole life, that would be huge.
Right. But that's the problem, right? Let me ask you, how many large private groups do you know that are out there now?
That's true. Right? Well, in the urology world, there's like one in each big city, but then outside of that, but a lot of those now have been gobbled up by private equity. So it changes their engagement in the process too, when you're not really an owner anymore.
So, and that's, I think, the problem. That's the reality that I've noticed is there's less than, again, just to backtrack, I know what I walked into, and I joined a big private group. I had mentors, and it definitely was beneficial. If I did have the mentors, it would be even worse off than where I feel like I am now. But now the majority of people coming out of training are either going to join some institution, Kaiser, or kind of just become an employee doc for a hospital. And in those environments, it could be a lonely place. Right? You don't, are you doing cases well? Are you taking care of patients the way you'd want to? Are you growing your practice the way you want to? And I do worry for a lot of maybe the larger percentage of physicians coming out of training. How are they getting their mentorship and their guidance? And how do we help them be successful as a healthcare, society? And outside of doing this on a very small scale that I do one-on-one, I'm not sure as a healthcare field, how do we solve this issue? And unless it's a very actionable step in training that's established across the board, no matter what specialty you're in, or to your point, unless it's incentivized or, larger either private groups or institutions or hospitals recognize how critical this is, and they take that upon themselves to to make these new hires successful. Because the reality is this, if I was a CEO and I hired an orthopedic surgeon to join my orthopedic section at my hospital, and I didn't give them tools to be successful, not only were they unproductive by the 2 years of their contract, now I have to go find another orthopedic surgeon, start all over. So it behooves me as the CEO to make them as successful as possible. But admittedly, CEOs are under tight budgets, and this is probably not on the top of the list of things to spend money on. But if you really dig into it, this is probably some of the most valuable areas you can spend money in to make sure you grow and nurture your young physicians to make them as productive for your institution.
That's interesting. And if you look at it even from, because we've had a few nurses on the show who kind of are doing the same thing and trying to build these alternative income streams, that if you built a hospital or a system, that this was all part of it, so that all of your employees can love coming to work and they're not stressed about these things. I think on the other side, when you get into the corporate world, is they would worry more, well, wait, if we make all our employees financially independent, they're going to all leave. And I could just picture having this discussion with some of our top management, and there's, I think it's a minority of corporate managers who could see that vision of, well, wait, what if? And now we have engaged employees who don't feel trapped, and they're there because they love it. And people want to come work there because they're like, oh, you go there, you're going to learn all this other stuff.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, and I can speak about nurses, but for physicians, right? Majority of physicians go into this knowing this is a long haul. So for them to come out of training and get a job with the hospital, this isn't just a transactional step that most physicians make. They're like, okay, I've done all this training. I've spent a lot of time and energy getting really good as being a physician. Now I want to park in one location, build my practice, build my reputation, take good care of patients in this environment that I've chosen. Just because I'm financially sound on the back end, I'm going to bet on the general altruistic aspect of physicians that most will stay on just to do what they've spent half their lives at this point educating to do, and take care of people. And maybe it's naive of me to think that, but I want to believe in that of the colleagues I work with more than, hey, as soon as they make X amount of dollars, they're out of there and doing some other side hustle. And I'm sure there's an element of physicians that are like that, but I just, to your point of the administrators or the people in charge, worry that if we make them too sound financially, they might leave and all that. It's definitely possible, but I want to believe that we're moving all together in the right direction.
Well, it's because I've met a few guys who are younger, and either they've got little kids or they don't have kids. And when you look at a lot of the recruiting packages that are thrown out by healthcare systems, at least in urology, I mean, you probably get them too. It's like 10 calls a day and your emails, and they're like, for the sign-on bonuses were so good that they spent the first 10 years of their career, because it's now you're not building a practice, that it's like building a business. They're just an employee. And that's the way they see it. And they're like, no, I signed a 3-year contract. I get my sign-on bonus. And 3 years later, I go find me another sign-on bonus. It becomes a significant portion of their overall income, getting the bonuses.
Sure.
And so if you were giving somebody something different that incentivized them to stay, because they're like, I'm not going to find this community, this knowledge, this mentorship anywhere else.
Absolutely. And there's something to that. And I'll tell you, from our perspective as a private group, we're about 40 orthopedic surgeons. And I'm not saying we have it perfect. I know as a group or as individual docs, we don't make the most money. And there's guys that are in the employed model or work for other institutions that make more. But what we do have is that long-term stability. And I mean, if there's any issues, complications, I mean, you have another group of 35 docs to talk to run things by. I mean, there's that mental support, there's that camaraderie. These are all things that, while you can chase the contractual employment model and get the sign-on bonus, which helps solve the financial bucket a little bit, but you definitely miss on the collegiality. And that's where I feel like we've been successful as a private group to stay in existence, because we have that environment, and you can't quantify it, right? It's a very intangible thing, but once you're in it, you recognize it. And I agree with you. I think if hospitals do develop environments like that, you're going to have a lot more retention. You're not going to have to pay for that signing bonus, right? So let's say a signing bonus is, and I'm making a number, $25,000. What if you invested that in that doc to stay in the long run and teach them how to be a very productive member of your institution and your environment and invest in their own personal growth. And they now are going to stay 5, 10, 15 years. Those are 3 or 4 iterations of signing bonuses you didn't have to pay out to somebody else and go chase another physician.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like it wasn't until I started looking for more things that your what's the Tony Robbins, your net worth is your network, that meeting people that now, like tax strategies that I spent years, asking my accountant, things, and I have one friend who he tells this great story where he's like, yeah, it's my accountant. Like, what else can I do? And they're like, well, you make it, you got to pay it. And,
Right.
oh, well, max out your 401k. And that was the most advice I ever got until I finally
I agree.
met some people with some more advanced tax strategies. And all of a sudden, like, that signing bonus with the right people in place, I make more than that in tax savings every year.
Exactly.
And once you got those structures, those are hard things to leave because you start looking around and you're like, this doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah. And it goes back again to getting the right bits of information early enough in your career, whether it's in residency or whether you find the right mentor to help guide you along as a young physician, is that little bit of information now dramatically changes your philosophy on how your outlook is. If you came across as, hey, I'm going to transition jobs every 3 years for this purpose, then you're like, well, why do I want to disrupt my family or kind of move to a different city and start all over every single time just to chase this strategy? Whereas you can more than make up for it with the right bits of information. And it's not complicated. Like everyone's got the aptitude to handle it and understand it. But if we don't know, or just never heard about it, we can't act on it. And again, as you know, this is not all rocket science. This is all very basic information we should all know as busy professionals, not just as physicians, but any busy professional. And it's really unfortunate that we don't have that organized yet. That it should just be a package. Like everybody in training should just know this information, and here you go. This is part of your education.
That's and this can be one of those things grinding in my mind now. Like, well, how can we better do these? All right. I want to jump back to the real estate side a little bit and go back to, so when you went from just investing in deals and you kind of had some friends coming along but then you decided to start Lion Park Capital. Why did you make that decision? Because that's some work to set up a private equity firm and the backside of it and compliance. And, it's not just a nothing thing. So what prompted you to start it and how was that process?
I think what prompted me is, I think it was also while I was helping people get connected into this space and getting access to deals that I was part of and just to sharing like the benefits of investing in real estate. I also knew that I wanted to continue to grow personally in real estate, and being a limited investor, limited partner was fine. But at the same time, it's in the title, you're limited, right? It's very passive. You're not involved on the operation side. You're not learning, okay, why are we picking this debt structure with a variable rate in this, in this investment strategy or in this project versus fixed structure in another asset? How are we deciding how much money we're going to put in each year? Like I just generally find all that interesting. So that was my incentive to keep learning and pushing and eventually establishing Lion Park Capital as a kind of an organized entity. So selfishly, from my perspective, it gave me the opportunity to stay in this space. I'm still doing the same effort. I'm still talking to colleagues and friends and anyone who's interested in real estate about, getting into multifamily investing. But then I'm also personally just learning more and more from professionals and guys who do this really, really well, this in terms of the sponsors I partner with.
So you now have this, this business relationship and this deeper exposure to some pretty, I imagine, talented people from who understand a lot of finance stuff and construction stuff.
Yes.
And at the same time, in your hospital setting, you're on the executive board and you got How much do you find that all this new exposure to this whole different thought process
Yes.
impacts what you can bring back to your practice?
It's hard to put a value to it. And it's funny. It's funny you bring this up because I've said this many times to some of my fellow board members and other leadership, other physicians who are in leadership positions, where if I only knew the information I learned from my real estate endeavors and we applied it to our medical decision making from running the business and the practice and our own investments from the practice, so many things I would have done differently. So many things I wouldn't have even participated in because, in general, physicians aren't the best business individuals out there. I think that's pretty well established. But we do the best we can. But again, it's the same theme. With the right education, your thought process, your decision ability is dramatically different. So I've learned so much in how, the experts in the real estate world look at an opportunity and generate real value and returns for the investors, and applying that to how we run a business in the healthcare world. There's not completely symmetric, but there's a lot of overlap. And because at the end of the day, it's the same logic, it's the same rationality. And you can't just say, as a fellow surgeon, surgeons are type A individuals, and historically, whoever yelled the loudest and pounded their fist the hardest on the table is how decisions got made, and those days are over. It doesn't work like that anymore. So it's been fun to like, okay, what can I extrapolate out of the real estate world, and then blend that into hospital administration as well as running our practice.
Have you had one of those moments where you're sitting in a real estate meeting and they're talking about something and all of a sudden you have this connection and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, and it just like all of a sudden this whole door opens on the medical side that you're like,
it does.
How did we never
Guys,
even consider this?
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, guys, we're doing this all wrong, right? Like, and I mean, it's, I'm sorry to keep reiterating this. It's just the same basic things. Like, I just wish I knew this earlier in my career. And it's not like something got invented in the last 5 years, but it's the reality of just blending the more, diverse all of us can be, and we can extrapolate, the best practice in other areas. It all can help our careers, right? And our medical practices. But you're right. I mean, I can't count the number of times I've been in a general partner meeting, and a call of how do we optimize occupancy, and how do we get conscious of controlling expenses, and all these metrics that are critical in the real estate world from income statement perspective, and applying a cap rate and all those valuations. It's running a business, and now that where healthcare is going, if we're trying to be fiercely independent as a private practice, we have to run it like a tight business. And I think before, when reimbursements, there was some extra meat on the bone, and there's some areas to not be optimized in running a healthcare practice, but we could still generate pretty good take home pay. Not to say it's not there still, but it's a lot more work to run it in a savvy fashion to still be able to achieve those take home salaries that we feel like physicians are entitled to.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, that's cool. Cause I just, when you start seeing this bigger world, because we can get so like tunnel vision, like everybody's kind of coming from the same direction and going the same place. So when I started hearing different opinions that were so different. Right. So
sorry, but as right, like when we come out of training, all we can rely on are the guys we worked with, like who are my mentors, who are my attendings. And this is how my attending ran his practice. So I'm going to do mine the same way because he was the most successful in that microenvironment. But unfortunately, those rules of engagement in that environment, maybe if that university setting doesn't work when you go out to your private setting or your hospital employee model, and you have to be nimble enough to make those changes and know it's not that formula doesn't work in every location. So again, being very facile and understanding, okay, there's different ways to be successful in different environments, and then applying that is really important.
So with this now, you've had Lion Park Capital for a few years. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years with this as a surgeon, as a real estate investor?
And no, that's a great question. And that's kind of where that's when we're trying to be very protective of kind of my space and my future. I love operating. I love being a surgeon. I'm not doing this to find a side hustle to exit medicine. So I want to be in medicine in the long run. My goal is how do I figure out how to operate into my 50s and 60s if they let me, but because I want to, not because I'm forced to, not because okay, I'm just in this rat race of if I don't do 10 cases a week or 15, whatever the number is, then I can't survive or have a take home income. I want to operate because I enjoy operating. And again, back to what I was saying earlier, if I can find a way, maybe through real estate or some other way to generate income, then I can operate and take care of patients on a scale that I'm happy with, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week. If it's 5 days a week, that's fine, but it's because I want to do it that way. So that's kind of my goal. It's I've spent all my life learning how to be a surgeon. I spend a lot of energy to be a really good surgeon. And I feel like I'm in a group environment that nurtures that. And I love it. So I feel like I've got a lot of the boxes checked off that people in training and residency would ever hope to have. I don't want to walk away from it. I don't want to throw it away just because everyone is, healthcare has got this negative connotation right now in terms of how difficult it is. Let's just find a different way to, handle the financial piece of it, and then still enjoy the benefits of being a physician and all the satisfaction fulfillment it provides.
So I can feel some docs I know going, "Oh man, I'm busy enough here. I'm
Yeah.
busy with my kids." This even just the idea of being a passive investor and learning
Yeah.
this stuff becomes overwhelming. So how do you
Yeah.
what's the key to you got several balls in the air here of
Yeah.
keeping the juggling going and making it all work so you
Right.
still feel like life is wonderful and not just
Sure.
crushed?
Yeah. And I'll be very honest. This wasn't easy to just decide one day to do this and it just happened. It does take work and energy, but it's like everything else. Like having your eye on the prize at the end is what's important. And for me, I was linking all my efforts to learn about real estate to my family. I have 4 boys. If they want to go into medicine, great. I will help nurture that for them, but I'm not gonna make them do it. Like no one should become a physician unless they're passionate about it because it's a tough journey. So at the end of the day, if I'm not gonna be able to pass on my medical knowledge to them, I wanted to pass on something. So that was honestly a big incentive for me to really spend the energy to get into real estate, really learn it inside and out, so that no matter what my kids end up doing, I feel like they can still do this as part of the same philosophy of generating income for themselves. So in terms of how to handle it, I'm strictly of the mindset of compartmentalizing things. Where I learned this lesson from is, when you're in surgery, no one will bug you. Everyone feels, apologetic if they call you or actually interject or distract you because you're doing actual surgery. But for some reason, in other walks of our life, that's all flexible. And I just decided to extrapolate that out. So when I'm with my kids or when I'm with my family, I try very hard. There's no phones. I'm not accessible to work. When I'm working on real estate, I find blocks of time where I can focus strictly on that and not be distracted. So kind of again, what I was mentioning earlier, a lot of my real estate work is done maybe an hour or two before I go to the clinic or start my surgeries, or there'll be an hour or two at the end of the day. Again, not every day, but I've got very strict times I try to spend my energy and focus on these different areas so that I'm not being pulled in many directions while trying to do too many things and not really be very effective at anything. Right. So if I'm with my
Yeah.
family and we're watching a movie, like I'm not trying to answer emails. I'm not trying to do anything else. And when I'm in surgery, I'm doing surgery. I mean, it's just following that philosophy.
That's
The,
awesome.
the challenge is on us, right? Is how do you become more efficient with your time? How do you, do a time audit of your week to week schedule? Like, do you really watch 3 hours on Netflix a day? And do you need to watch that much, right? I mean, do you kind of just kind of walk around aimlessly without any clear intention or direction? So when you start really paying attention to what we do, we're all busy. Everyone's busy, but you can always ink out a little bit more time or effective time if you really kind of dial it in. And I mean, trust me, I had all the same comments. I don't want to use the word excuses, but I had all the same thoughts like, how else do I fit this in? And I'm telling you, I mean, I have 4 kids. I'm a trauma surgeon. I take call. I serve in leadership roles, and there is a way to do this. And I've been married now almost 20 years. So
that's awesome. You know, that when you speak of that time audit, that was something that somebody was proposing to me just recently, that going through for a week or whatever, and every 15 minutes, what did I do the last 15 minutes? And seeing how much time you waste, or that you're not doing important things, but at the same time, like, then your relaxation time, are you truly disengaging, and find out that, oh, well, this was, I needed a break. And what'd you do during your break? I checked my email and social media.
Right.
It's not a break.
Right. No. And as I say this, this includes, exercising, if you meditate, taking time to do that. I mean, this includes your own mental health and your own physical health. This isn't just, how do I get more efficient with my hours to do more work? This is trying to figure out what's important to you. You sit down, list the top 5 things that are important to you, and you figure, okay, how do I make those a priority in a week? And then everything else kind of filters in around that.
That's awesome. Well, Nimesh, this has been a great conversation. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, because you've got a lot of great things going on, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Probably my email address is the easiest. It's Nimesh Patel at Lion Park Cap. It's NIMESH PATEL at Lion, LIONPARKCAP.com. So that's my email address. I'm very accessible to that. And then, we can set up Zoom calls, phone calls, text, things like that. And whether it's talking about real estate, or again, talking about just the physician side of things, I again, spend a lot of time just having conversations, mentoring people, but I do have a few individuals that we kind of work more in a one-on-one relationship for an extended period of time, and we kind of go from there.
All right. And we'll include your email in the show notes. Okay. If somebody wanted to talk to you about mentorship, do they have to be an orthopedic surgeon?
They don't. No. And I kind of talk about that because obviously that's my wheelhouse, and I can talk more freely and completely about all of that aspect of one's practice. But based on this conversation, you could tell it's not all about surgery. I mean, that's at the end of the day, being a surgeon, how that works in the big package is probably 20% of things, but everything else, I've talked to non-surgeons as well and guided them along this pathway as well.
Awesome. I could just hear some people I know going, well, that's great, but I'm not an orthopedic surgeon. So
sure. No, that's a good question. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
So we'll just put the question out there. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I hope it's added value to. You're welcome to all our listeners here on Surgeon Syndicate. So thank you for joining us. If you have any questions for Nimesh or for myself, please reach out, say hello. We'd love to talk to you, and join us next time here on Surgeon Syndicate. This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.